Yesterday I was talking about being in the old man's house and seeing in the back garden the plumed serpent in the form of a butterfly tree, the buddleia tree. And in front of the buddleia tree there was a large black dog, very big black dog. Well, it's only recently, actually, this is probably about 14 years ago, I've only recently found out that the black dog is actually the brother of Quetzalcoatl, who appeared as the plumed serpent. So when I saw the plumed serpent and the black dog, I realized that was Quetzalcoatl, but I didn't realize that his brother was actually a black dog. So that's just a point to make. I also was talking about in 2001, well, in the Christmas of 2000, I had a stroke. And I went back to the point where I was looking at a journal, Harvest Journal, a Jungian journal, and looking at the individuation process in the paintings of this woman that Jung was analysing. And I said that she painted a picture before, I think it was the day before she was being analysed, and she painted the sea and some rocks. And in fact, she, as a figure in the dream, she was stuck in the rocks. So you have this kind of pyramid rock, and she's stuck in the rock. And there were round rocks like eggs. And she has a first session with Jung, and then she paints another picture. But her comment on the first picture was that Jung appeared in the dream as a wizard with a magic wand. And so anyway, the next painting revealed the fact that there was a flash of lightning, and it came down from the sky and struck the pyramidal rock, and it broke, and the egg shape broke away, and it's as if Jung, the magician, was liberating her from a very fixed position. In other words, she came to him to be analysed because she was stuck. She was stuck in her life. She couldn't kind of find a way out in her life in the future. She might have been in a bad relationship. She might have had traumas when she was younger. But she was in a crisis of identity or something going on like that. And I got vertigo when I was looking at the picture, and then I said earlier that I felt that somebody was opening up my brain, you know, kind of pulling the two hemispheres apart, as if something was happening to my brain. Well, the word stroke, you could say a stroke of lightning, something like a stroke of lightning, and as if something, and also the point that the egg is like the head. So you've got the egg as the head, and the pyramidal rock as I've said before, as the kind of torso area, and then you've got the cube at the bottom representing the earth, and then you've got the cone or the pyramidal center body, and then you have the sphere as the head. So you have the black, the red, and the gold. But anyway, I'm just saying, going back to that point that the stroke could have been like a flash of lightning, an invisible, you might say, alien force, as it were, something coming down and doing something to the brain and affecting the brain. So and the idea that Jung could do that, the idea that Jung in his astral body could actually bring about that breakthrough for that woman, is very typical of the effect Jung had on people. He had that effect all the time on people, and he would appear in their dreams and such. So now I'm going to mention two very important dreams. Now, Jung distinguished between the ordinary dream that we dream every day, which is like the ordinary dream. He calls that the little dream. Then the great dream is when you have like a vision where something very important is being shown to you without the kind of soap opera. Most dreams are like a soap opera, but this is like a very important drama, as it were, and something's being revealed in a vision to you. I had these dreams around that time. I mean, we came here in 1997, and I moved in here in 2001. So in that period I had these like two dreams before I moved in here. I'm in a dream and I'm walking down a very steep hill with Jung. So Jung's on my right, I'm on his left. We're walking down a very steep hill, and there are some young people behind us, and they're chatting away. And Jung says to me, oh, they think it's about the unicorn. So he's kind of making a joke or some kind of remark about, oh, they think it's about the unicorn. And then I have another big dream, and I'm going down the hill, kind of a slight, I suppose it would be a path or a hill, and I'm behind a group of young people, and they're all dressed in black, and I've got this sense that they're female, so I've got this sense of long black hair and just like young ladies, as it were, in front of me, walking in front of me, and they go into the front door of a house, and the house has windows on each side of the front door, and I think they go into the left. I think I've got this feeling they do go into the left. Anyway, I find myself going to the left, and I go into this room, it's lit up, this room, and I see all these coffee crates. They're like brown coffee crates, big coffee crates where they transport coffee in, maybe by ship or something, big wooden crates. And maybe they're about, say, 2 foot square. And they're cube, the shape is a cube. And so they're kind of scattered around the floor, and they're kind of open, as if something's going to be unpacked. It's as if they're going to be unpacked. And there is Jung. Jung is sitting amongst them. He's sitting down, and I go over to him, and I sit to his left. So I'm in the dream with the unicorn. I'm on his left, going down the hill. Now I'm on his left again. And he takes out of the cubic box, as it were, a black sphinx, a small black sphinx, maybe 8 inches long. And he hands me the black sphinx, and I look at it, and it turns into the cosmos. So when I'm looking at the black sphinx, it actually looks like the starry cosmos. And then he gives me another sphinx, which is a kind of reddy brown sphinx, same size, reddy brown sphinx. And he gives it to me, and he leaves the room. He goes in the back and leaves the room. And I'm looking at this Sphinx, and I turn it upside down, and I see the name Akhenaten, the husband of Nefertiti, that I've associated with the idea of the genius, just like Imhotep in the past was the genius. And he was a very creative, evidently a very creative person, and he kind of brought about a very natural, artistic flowering. Everything was very natural and graceful. And I've also said that Freud, Jung's colleague Freud, he actually wrote a book saying that Moses was Akhenaten because Freud was Jewish, and he had this idea that Moses was Akhenaten. Jung returns from the room, from the back, and he's bringing with him what appears to be a bottle of wine. When you buy wine, you put it in the white paper, you wrap it up maybe in the white paper. So I assume it's red wine. And he's standing there kind of smiling, and he says, "Oh, so you got a first, did you?" Now, when he said, you got a first, did you? Meaning, when you go to Oxford University and you get the honours, you get the honours, then you get a first degree. You get an honorary degree, a first degree. Now, of course, my best friend was at Oxford, did classics, and he was very high up. He was a scholarship. He got a scholarship to Exeter College. But he didn't get a first. He should have got a first, but I met him while he was in his last year, and I think it was my influence that distracted him, so he didn't pay attention to his studies. We were doing lots of interesting things, and in fact he didn't get a first. So anyway, that allusion to like getting a first at Oxford, right, so as I said, I got quite ill, my friend gets married, and I find this flat here. Right, I move into this flat here. And it's opposite the castle, it's at the top of a very steep hill. So the steep hill, Maidenborough Street, it runs parallel with the hill of the castle. So when you go past the castle down the park, it's a very, very steep hill to the river at the bottom. So the street I'm living on is very, very steep, and it's in the Dutch Quarter, a very old, the oldest part of town, and there's some very old 16th century Dutch houses, very, very lovely houses. Anyway, so, I start, obviously, on my walk and everything, I end up going down the street. I've not been down there before. So I go down the street. So I'm going down this steep hill, and at the bottom of the hill, on the right-hand side, there's a house, and there's a plaque outside, and it says Unicorn Cottage. So there's Jung and I walking down the hill. He's on the right side, I'm on the left. We're going down the hill, and I find out, and he's saying, oh, they think it's all about the unicorn. I go down the hill, on the right-hand side where Jung was, on the right-hand side is Unicorn Cottage. Right, that's one thing. Between my house and the castle, which is a few hundred feet, there's a church, the Castle Methodist Church, and part of the church has a flat roof, so when I look out of my window I can see over the roof and I get a clear view of the park. It probably is one of the best views you get in Colchester. I've got one of the best views in Colchester, and I can see the castle, I can see the Holly Trees Mansion, which is now a Victorian museum, and there's a church that's been renovated, and it's now a natural history museum. And then further down the road, I can't quite see it, but it's just across the road, it is a modern art gallery. Anyway, you come out of the house, you cross, you go through the yard of the church, you go alongside the church, and you come to the gates of the castle. They're not the main gates, they're the kind of side gates of the castle. And that's where the gold rose was, right in the rose garden there was the gold rose. Anyway, there's a crystal shop, a New Age crystal shop, and it was called, originally when I moved in here, it was called the New Dawn. Then it became known as Enchanted, and now it's called Rocks and Rubies. And it's interesting because the ruby is often synonymous with the garnet, which is my own bloodstone. It's often, when people allude to the ruby, they're actually alluding to the garnet, which is the carbuncle, which is the third eye, but it's often known. And of course, in the base of the horn of the unicorn, you find the carbuncle stone, the garnet, which is my own stone. And there's a crystal shop here, so that's another kind of coincidence. And I was walking past the New Dawn, as it were, and in the window were the two sphinxes, exactly as I had them in the dream. There was the black sphinx and the reddy brown sphinx. So that's again a coincidence with the dream. And next door was a kind of a shop, and it sold like, it's kind of a new age shop. It sold different materials and some carpets, very, very alternative type of stuff, you know, like a bazaar or something. And they're the two shops right in front of the castle. So one day I go out, and I know they've been renovating that shop, right? So I go out, and I go out, and it's right next door to the New Dawn where I saw the sphinxes, and now it's called the Coffee Cube. So now this shop appears out of nowhere, called the Coffee Cube. So I had the cube with Jung and the sphinxes with Jung, and there's the crystal shop with the sphinxes, and there's the coffee cube, and I said the coffee crates. I saw them as coffee crates. Very, very strange, extremely strange. And if you go into the coffee cube, they have a whole wall of cubes. So there's like the pattern of a cube across the whole of one wall. So that ties in the two dreams of Jung, seeing Jung in the two dreams, the unicorn, the carbuncle stone, the sphinxes, and the coffee cube. So, you know, that's pretty powerful. I mean, it was like pretty powerful. So another aspect was that when I saw the coffee cube, which was open, for the first day it was open, there were three people from inside standing outside, and they're all in black. And only recently had I had the sighting of UFOs by the castle. 5 UFOs appeared, and they disappeared, and then a grey cylinder appeared, and I watched it with my binoculars, this grey cylinder. It was a kind of like apparition. It wasn't from my own mind, but it was projected out there from somewhere, this silver cylinder, and it floated down and disappeared near the military base, where the 5 other pentagram UFO formation, they disappeared near the military base. And of course, the idea is that the aliens actually live under the earth. That's the idea, that they live in bases and live in areas under the earth. So in ufology, there's the idea of what they call the men in black. and you get these men in black. So in front of the coffee cube are these men in black. There were these people dressed in black right after I had my sighting of the UFO. That's just another type of thing that manifests. Sticking with the idea of Jung, in his Memory, Dreams and Reflections, his autobiography, he's talking about the influence of synchronicity on his life, the various synchronicities. And in 1928, he has this great, big dream, this vision dream. And he's actually in Liverpool, England, which is, Liverpool actually is near where I was born, in Lancashire. It's quite close to Salford, Manchester, where I was born. And he's with some colleagues from Zurich, and they're walking around the city. I think it's at night, things are lit up. And he comes to this square, and in the centre of the square is this pool of water, this pond or pool of water. And there's an island, and there's light shining from the island. It's lighting everything up. This is kind of invisible light, as it were, but it's emanating from a red magnolia tree. It's actually emanating from a red magnolia tree. And Jung saw this as a very, very important dream, and he likened the square with the circle, the circular pond and the tree as a mandala, a Tibetan mandala. And he's saying it signifies the south. In the centre is the tree, and the light signify the south. Well, when I was putting all these pieces together here in my own mythology, when you come up from the river through the park, you go up the path, and there's a red magnolia tree. And so as soon as I saw that red magnolia tree, I linked it to Jung. I actually linked it to Jung. And you go up further, and there's a pond. It's not a circular pond, but it's a pond. And growing over the pond is a red magnolia tree. So again, I kind of saw these like connections and made these connections with Jung, as if somehow his presence or his influence. Now, I've often thought, if as he would say, from the archetypal level, what I call the archetypal code, the synchronicity is, you might say, is the pattern of events that's projected from the archetypal code into the symbolic code, in which the psyche and the physical world, the universe, operates. So synchronicity connects a dream, say, dreaming of the Sphinx, and then seeing actual sphinxes in a shop window. So you've got the psychic, the inner psychic, and the outer physical. And Jung says that they're projected from the archetype, and they appear in this psychic world and the physical world, the kind of interdimensional. So you could say the archetypal, by implication, is interdimensional. And you wonder, like I did about the War of the Roses, and I thought, well, how are the War of the Roses connected to me, the red rose and the white rose, etc.? And then I realised that that's the emblem of Lancaster, and that's where I had the vision of the red cube, the red cubic crystal. Now, what's interesting about that context, which I didn't mention before, that when we were travelling, we went from Oxford up to Lancaster, 200 miles. when we were coming to the outskirts of Lancaster, I've never been there before. When we were coming into the outskirts of Lancaster, my friend Roderick Main, Professor Roderick Main, he pointed out the university, which was outside the city. It was in the countryside on a hill, and he pointed to it. And as I looked over to the right at the university, there was a big cloud above it, this big cloud in the absolute perfect shape of a unicorn. It's very, very strange. It was in the perfect shape of a unicorn. Now, the unicorn at its base, at the base of its horn, is the carbuncle, which is the cubic garnet, the red cube, and that's where I later had my vision. And that's the red rose, and then we come here and find the gold rose. So if you think of, say, the magnolia tree, probably was, say it was planted 20 years ago, and you think, well, what's that got to do with me? What's that got to do? It's certainly got something to do with Jung, because he had the red magnolia tree. But, you know, what does that tree or those two trees in the park, what's that got to do with me? Now, you could think that somebody planted that tree, so they're using their mind, their psyche. Somebody comes up with the idea of planting a magnolia tree in that park. So that idea is in their mind. So we're dealing with the psyche. We're dealing with the psyche. And it's the same idea of saying, well, the step pyramid of Imhotep is connected to, that's a castle of eternity, and that's connected to this castle here. And this castle here is connected to the Grail castle. You think that's fantastic. What's that? I mean, how are those things connected? But you see, if you look at it from the archetypal level, all of that's inside the archetype. Everything in the universe, all the knowledge in the universe, as it were, from a Jungian point of view, is in this archetypal code, which is the Ennead. So you've got the Ennead, the invisible Ennead, and they're like emanating the archetypal code in the form of symbols, the meta program, the symbols of the gods. So all of these things are connected through the field of synchronicity, as it were, which is the kind of infrastructure of the symbolic code. So if you think of the symbolic code as the matrix of consciousness, but the matrix of all of our consciousnesses, if you like, that we're all connected objectively through the archetype, influencing all intelligent life in the universe. So you think of all other planets with alien intelligence, but of course we're the alien intelligence to them. So you think of alien intelligence, or just say the intelligence in the universe of hominoids, you know, people like us, so to speak. In a sense, I would suggest that in the Jungian sense that we're all connected. So the archetype is a kind of eternal aspect of the universe that's invisible, like the Ennead, and it's having you might say an eternal effect on the visible time and space continuum. So you might say that the consciousness itself, as a function of intelligent life, is actually all one thing. And just like all bodies come from a genetic code, but when if you're dealing with, say, all bodies come from a genetic code, then where does the genetic code come from? And you say, well, everything's got a genetic code. So you could say that the blueprint of the genetic code, the blueprint of the symbolic code, even the blueprint of the archetypal code, you might say, is inbuilt in the universe. And if Thoth is the one who, as architect, designs the universe geometrically, like the idea of a holographic universe, as it were, then that person that planted the red magnolia has no idea about the future or the past or anything like that. But he's not doing it, that person's not doing it in isolation. That person is part of a, you might say, a meta-program that's programming all of consciousness across time. And so now I'll give a very good example, again involving Jung. So I think it's in the 1920s. Jung was born in 1875. That's the year Aleister Crowley was born, and the year Gurdjieff was born. Three great teachers. And so with 1920, he was in his late 30s, and he decides he's living with his wife and children on Lake Zurich. And in fact, when I went on the grand tour of Europe, I actually went through Zurich. I remember the bridge going over, I think it's a very wide river, and the bridge going over. But I didn't know anything about Jung in 1966. I was 21 with my wife and everything. I don't remember, I mean, I didn't know anything about Jung until 1980, when I started having all these synchronicities. I didn't even know what I've never heard the word synchronicity, and in fact in my vocabulary the word coincidence wouldn't even been used in my so I've never referred to a thing called coincidence before the age of 35, and then I wrote a journal and kept a journal from that time on. So anyway, in the 20s, Jung decides to build what he calls the tower. He decides to build the tower further along the lake. He bought some land a long way from his house, a few miles from his house or whatever, and he started, building this tower. Obviously he had masons there helping him to build the tower. And one day, this stone, the stones, the big stones, were actually brought by a boat. So there's a kind of sailboat, and it brought the stone to the house. And one day this stone was brought, meant to be the cornerstone, and it was the wrong shape. Was the wrong shape, and it was actually a perfect, as Jung says, it was a perfect cube. So absolutely a perfect cube. And the mason said, "Oh, take it back, it's not right." And Jung said, "No." He says, "I want that. That's my stone. That belongs to me. That's my stone." And anyway, he puts this big stone cube in front of the tower, which he was building, this tower. And actually it took till 1950 to finish, so 25 years before he finished it. And it has a central tower with four like rooms or sections on it. And he likened that to a mandala. So you've got the four corners of the mandala, and you have a central area of the mandala. And often there's a castle in the centre. Now it's interesting that the Liverpool Dream with the Magnolia Tree, a year later, he's painting these mandalas. In fact, it's his last mandala that he's painting. And he paints this golden castle in the middle of a Tibetan mandala he's painting. And Richard Wilhelm, who was a priest in China and was very, very influential in bringing Taoism to Europe, but more especially, he was the one that actually translated the I Ching. So when people used the I Ching in the 60s and 50s, 60s, 70s, that was by Richard Wilhelm. He was the translator of the I Ching, and it's the Baines edition. Actually, the Baines edition, I think it's published by Routledge, so forth. And he receives a note, he receives a letter from Richard Wilhelm, and he said, would Jung write this forward for this book? And it's an ancient alchemical treatise called The Secret of the Golden Flower. And in The Secret of the Golden Flower, it mentions the Tao as the great one, and it's all about yogic meditation and the circulation of the light, which is like the secret of the golden flower, i.e. the golden rose, as it were, and the golden castle. It's when you're meditating, and the energy, the pranic energy to do with the chakras, is called psychic heat. And it's like you heat up your body, as it were, and that's the red fiery serpent goddess Kundalini, serpent power, when you awaken it from the root chakra. So it's black, then it's red, and then it's gold in the thing. So it's the black, red, and the gold again. And so he receives that, and in the manuscript is a golden castle. So he's painted this golden castle, and suddenly he gets his letter, this thing, and it's about this golden castle in The Secret of the Golden Flower. And he sees that as a major breakthrough, because at the time he did that, he felt cut off from the world. He's in his tower, he felt very cut off from the world, and he said all his colleagues, all his scholarly colleagues and different people, top people, you know, in the world on mysticism and mythology and symbol, none of them understood. He couldn't talk to anybody, and this was his kind of breakthrough. Anyway, he puts this stone cube in front of his tower, and he inscribes it. He carves some writing in it and says this is the rejected cornerstone, because Christ was actually referred to in the Bible, in the Gospel, later in the Gospels or the Acts of the Apostles. He was referred to as the rejected cornerstone. Of course, the Jews and the people at that time, they rejected him as the Messiah. They said he's not the Messiah, and they put him to death, didn't they? So they rejected him. He's the cornerstone. And that's actually mentioned in the Psalms of David. And of course, David and Solomon are from the tribe of the Lion of Judah, and so is Jesus. And their stone is the carbuncle. Their actual stone is the carbuncle. And if you read the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that actually refers to the idea of the carbuncle being the stone of the lion. So you have the lion, and they say in the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, they talk about the Merovingians who were contemporaries of King Arthur. And in one of the graves, it shows that they've got these garnets, these carbuncles, referring actually to the garnet. And that was in the 5th, 6th century. So you have the kind of bloodline, what they call the Sangreal, is the holy blood in the Holy Grail, and that is the blood of Jesus. He referred to the wine in the chalice at the Last Supper as his blood. So it's the sacrificial blood. He puts on the red scarlet robe, and the garnet. Its root meaning is Kermes worm, and that Kermes worm is the serpent, is the dragon, and you extract the blood. You extract the scarlet dye from that. So that's the Sangreal, that's the bloodline of Horus. So we go right back to Horus, because he's the solar lion king, and he's seated on a golden throne, and he's sacrificed on a red cubic altar. So it all links in the whole bloodline. And my bloodline begins in England through William the Conqueror, when he came over and became the first Norman king of England, in his court was Gurney, i.e. garnet, and the term garnet or Gurney refers to a cellar of pomegranates, and the Latin granatum, pomegranate, is actually the root meaning of the garnet, because the garnet crystals, the granules of the crystals, look like the seeds of the pomegranate. So again, you've got the lineage of the Sangreal, the bloodline of the Holy Grail. Now, in Wolfram von Eckenbach, where he talks about the unicorn putting the head of the unicorn is placed in the lap of a virgin, and I likened it to the Pieta, where Jesus puts his head in the lap of the Virgin Mary after he's crucified, on the place of a skull. So he's crucified on the place of a skull, Golgotha. And in the Grail legend it says that from the white skull bone, it says, from the white skull bone is extracted the red carbuncle stone. So Jesus is the solar lion king. He's going to be resurrected as the king of the Jews, as it were, and he wore a scarlet robe. He's related to the wine being the blood in the chalice, and related to the unicorn and the virgin. And so again, going back to Jung and this stone cube in front of the tower, I started my research here 2003, and as I say, I had a library and so forth, and somewhere along the line, because in fact later on when I finished, I wrote 5 million words. So in 12 years I wrote 5 million words. That's about the length of 3 Bibles. It's very long, 3 Bibles. I have all the manuscripts here. But what I did was I began, the story begins, my own life story, with the meeting of the old man. So I start off with the old man, and it's called The Luminary is Coming, and it makes up 3 books, each 500 pages, and that's published on Amazon as The Luminary is Coming. And somewhere along the line, I got to the idea of my vision of the red cube. So I have this vision of, I wake up in the middle of the night, and I can't explain it, but I was, let's put it this way, when I was a being of light. I'm using that's not what I thought at the time, of course, but I'm just using the language. I'm not saying I believe or disbelieve, I'm just using the language. But I was standing, so I wake up in the middle of the night. I mean, not wake up, but I'm in a vision in the middle of the night, and I'm this being of light. I'm in this shower of gold. So I'm in this golden light. That's all I know. I don't experience a body or anything. I'm just in this golden light, and I'm in it. And the word comes into my mind as I come out of that state. A word comes into my mind: bliss. It's not a word I ever used before. I've never written about it. It's not in my vocabulary. Bliss. I wouldn't use that word. So I was in a state of utter bliss, and then I find myself standing in front of this entity, this statue entity, with the golden mask, So obviously the golden mask and the being of light and the golden light, and it has two large black oval eyes, and like an alien, typical alien has these large black oval eyes. And I look into the black oval eyes, and then I see that it's handing me something, and it hands me this red cube. And just before I experienced myself as a being of light, I actually had an image in my dream state. I had an image of my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who's Garnet. So his name is Garnet, and I didn't know what a garnet was. I never thought, oh, my grandparents, they're garnets and that's the crystal, da da da. I didn't ever do that because I hadn't really analysed those kind of things. So anyway, it hands me this red cube. And how I interpret that is, the red cube is the third eye. So you have the gold, the black eyes, and now you have red. That's the black, red, gold. So you might say, when I looked into the black eyes in the golden mask and given the red cube, that came out of, that's the third eye. They're giving me the third eye. And that's the eye of the carbuncle and the unicorn, and the third eye of the kundalini and the scarlet robe and the sacrifice and redemption, that kind of thing. And it handed the red cube to me from the right hand to the right hand. In Jungian psychology, the right hand is always the conscious hand, and the left hand path is the unconscious, the kind of occult, hidden black magic type of thing. So you make something conscious. So whatever it was, it's like the golden light, the illumination is to wake you up, to open your eyes, so you open your third eye. So it's to light up the darkness, the black eyes, the dark eyes. Now I liken the golden mask to Osiris. When he's in his mummy chamber, he actually wears a golden mask. So he's a mummy, but actually wears a golden mask. And Isis is the cobra. So she would have, you can imagine black cobra eyes, black eyes of the cobra. And then I would be Horus. So I'd be standing there, the initiate, being given something by his parents, as it were, the red cube. So I held it in my right hand, and it felt like lead. It felt so heavy, really, really heavy. And then it was suddenly light as a feather. It felt absolutely heavy, and then suddenly it's as light as a feather. And I felt that almost like my soul was inside that red cube. I felt like, I call it the soul substance. So it's like my soul, as it were. And what transpires is really that vision was in the Christmas of 1994, when I was in Lancaster. And I started getting into the cube in my life story, probably in around 2007, 2008. And what I believe happened is that inside that red cube was my future. Was actually, the red cube is a red book. Jung wrote his red book. He started his red book in around 1912, and I think he carried on writing in his red book for about 20 years or something like that. And that's all about his visions. He met all these entities and had all these visions and so forth and so on. And so did I. I had the vision of the red cube. I had a vision. So I met this entity and they gave me a red cube. Now the red book. So it's a sacrificial book. It's a redemptive book. And in other words, when you do the alchemical work, it's a work of devotion. You're dedicated. So for 12 years, I absolutely, 5 hours a day, all day, 5 hours a day, 7 days a week for 12 years. I did this work. I didn't leave Colchester. I didn't. In fact, I haven't been in a vehicle, an actual vehicle, for 15 years. In an actual vehicle, and I haven't been further than 1.5 miles from the house in 15 years. So I'm saying that inside that red cube was my fate and destiny, and I was really carrying out what Jung would call you're serving the ancestors. You're carrying on a tradition, a kind of, you might say, a symbolic tradition that involves your ancestors. And of course my ancestors go through the bloodline all the way back to Horus. In effect, the carbuncle, the garnet, that bloodstone actually does take me back to Imhotep. And so I started getting into the cube around 2007, the motif of the cube, and I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what the cube was, I didn't know what the garnet was, I didn't know anything about that. And I don't know what happened, but I started researching the Bible. I thought, well, I'll focus on the visions of the Bible and try to work things out in the Bible about the visions. I must have had a connection or something, I don't know what the connection was. But then I discovered that, that when Moses went to the top of the hill, when he went to the top of Mount Sinai, and he met the Lord God, his face shone as the sun. Now, when Horus goes to the top of the pyramid, his face shines as the sun because he's looking at Ra. He's face to face with Ra, Moses face to face with the Lord, and his face shines as the sun. And that one's on the mountain, the primeval mound, the pyramid, the volcanic island, the fire coming out of the top of the volcano, etc. And in Revelations it opens up with Jesus saying he had eyes of fire and his face shone as the sun. So it's a point of illumination. And so he's told by the Lord to design the tabernacle. And the tabernacle is a big tent. And it's often said in Egyptian mythology that you go to visit Osiris in his tent, in his pavilion, his tent. So it's likened to a tent. And of course the tent can be pointed like a pyramid. So you can actually see the tent above it's pointed like a triangle, then below it's square. So you've got the cube in the earth, which is the earth god, and then the sky goddess, you have the triangle above, which is the womb of Nut or the womb of Isis. And Osiris would be identical with his father, the cube beneath where he's buried in the earth, in his father, as it were. So he's told to design this tabernacle, and in the center is the gold-plated cube. So when I saw that, I thought, wow, this I didn't know anything about the cube in the Bible. And so then I was reading about Moses was formerly an Egyptian prince, and I started researching in ancient Egypt, and eventually I discovered a book called, it's a very interesting book, well worth reading, about initiation. It's a very small book called Star Maps by somebody called Fix, F-I-X, I think his name's Fix. And I have a lot of very interesting Egyptian books on Egypt, a lot of books on Egypt, and they're by Egyptologists. I don't have any proper occult books. I don't study things second-hand. I go right back to the source. So I don't read, Aleister Crowley. I've read his works and lots of other people's works, but I don't use those as source material. I always go back to original text, the Bible, Tibetan Buddhism. I have the original text from Tibetan Buddhism. So I study the original text. And So in this book, which is not a normal a book by Egyptologists, it's more of an alternative book. It's one of the few alternative books I have on ancient Egypt. And he shows the step pyramid. And he shows the step pyramid, and right in front of the step pyramid, which is known as the tower, it's the Castle of Eternity, but it's also referred to as the tower. And right in front is a stone cube. And it's a hermetically sealed stone cube, and Imhotep dedicated the pyramid to his father, and that was the first pyramid built, so it's dedicated to his father, King Zoser, and he's seated inside on a chair, and he's looking out of two peepholes, and he's looking out of these peepholes at Draco, the dragon, because that's his destination. So when you ascend, the place of ascension, the pyramid, when you ascend, you go through the planets, the 6 planets, the 6 steps, you go up the 6 steps, get in the sun boat, which is the chariot of fire. So he's seated in the chariot of fire, as it were. He's seated, the earth, that's attached to the earth. The first step is the earth, and this stone cube is attached to the first step. Then you go through the planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and then you're at the top of the pyramid, as it were. You're in the sun boat, and then you're transported out of the solar system. And I'm saying, and then I realised that's Jung. There's Jung's tower, and there's a stone cube. Now I know, I'm pretty absolutely sure that Jung knew nothing about the step pyramid. There's no reference in anything about Imhotep, the step pyramid. In fact, the step pyramid is only being excavated in the early part of the 20th century. I think it's still under excavation now. It's one of the, it's the first pyramid, but it's one of the last to be excavated. And it's in a place called Saqqara. And Saqqara is taken from the name Soka, who was the funerary god in prehistoric times, the funerary god Soka. But so I'm saying synchronistically, something archetypally, something was working on Jung, some meta-program was working on Jung to put that stone in front of that tower. And then I knew that he was part of the lineage of Hermes Trismegistus, because I'm making the claim that Imhotep is Hermes Trismegistus. That stone cube was hermetically sealed. That would be symbolic of the tomb of Osiris. That would be symbolic of the earth itself. So Imhotep was deified as Thoth. Now, the equivalent to Thoth in Greek mythology is Asclepius, the god of medicine. So you could say Thoth was a god of healing. Asclepius is the god of medicine, and in Alexandria, say, that was built around 300 BC, right until Christ, the time of Christ. Imhotep was celebrated as Asclepius, right? He was celebrated as Thoth, as a healer, Asclepius. Now, when Jung had his near-death experience and he was floating above the earth, he saw a meteorite, a black meteorite, which he thought was a kind of Buddhist temple. And in some other context, somebody mentioning Jung, I think it's it's a book dedicated to Jung. What they're saying is that it was a black cube. And the black cube is actually related to Saturn, because Saturn is Satan, Satan is Set, and Set is the black magician who kills Osiris and puts him in a box, and that box is the Acacia Ark. And of course that links to the black cube. So Jung's floating above the earth in a near-death experience. He sees this black cube, and he said if he went into the temple, into the illuminated room, he would meet his ancestors. He'd meet the people that he belonged to, his ancestry. So again, it's an allusion to the cube being the hermetic, that he felt he was part of the hermetic order. In fact, he wore a signet ring, a Gnostic signet ring, with a dragon and a serpent, which is Abraxas. So that signet ring signifies Abraxas, and Abraxas is Ion, and Ion is Saturn. In the Mithraic cult, Ion is Christ, but Ion is Saturn. So Jung in Memory, Dreams and Reflections, he actually mentions the golden chain of the initiates of Hermes Trismegistus that links the initiate on earth to Hermes Trismegistus in the heavens. So he's saying that he's part of the lineage of the golden ring, is the ring of perfection. It's the they might say the halo corona of the sun, and he's saying he's of the hermetic lineage, and I'm just proving that he's definitely coincident with Imhotep, his tower and the stone cube. And now here is the castle, which is the tower. It's actually called a keep. It's a castle keep, and the keep is known as a tower. And then I have this dream with Jung with the cubic coffee crates, and there's the coffee cube right in front of the tower. I mean, it's the building. It's actually facing the tower, the castle, and it's actually the closest to the gate. So actually, it's the closest you could get to the tower. So that links me to Jung, and Jung to Imhotep. And when I discovered that, I mean, it was fantastic. I mean, I discovered that in around 2008, and so anyway, so you might say, in symbolic terms, archetypally, that there is a level of programming, you could say programming in today's terminology. There's a program, what I would call the self meta program, which puts you in touch with yourself. So the Ennead, the archetypal level, is the self meta programming. When you come into the visible universe, the zodiac, and the mythology and the language of the gods, that's meta programming. And when you come to the society on earth, you know, the institutions, academia, the media, politics, business, all of the fabrication of society is actually a programming, right? A programming. And you could say that on the level of the programming as we're educated and brought up, you could say, in a sense, you're not being exposed to the meta program, which is synchronistic. But just like the Maya, the veil of illusion, when you have your third eye, you see through the veil of illusion. You begin to see the inner meaning of poetry, the inner meaning of music, the inner meaning of the Bible, the inner meaning of your own dreams. You know, the intuitive inner meaning. Then you're breaking through the fabric. In other words, you're going about your daily business, and suddenly you have a revelation, or you have a satori, you have a moment of enlightenment, and you have a coincidence, and your mind is being drawn to that meta program. You know, in other words, you're listening to a higher voice, the inner voice, the higher voice, the voice of genius, and you're beginning to attune to the Tao along the dragon path, and the lines of song, as it were, they're singing to you, your ancestors are calling you. And I mean that literally, physically right now. I mean that literally now. and it's alive. It's numinous. It's alive around you, and you know, and just like people dig up buried treasure, or you know, whatever, and I'm saying that. We don't know, you might say, how synchronicity actually works. We don't actually know. We're learning about the atom, we're learning about the quantum field, and we're learning about non-locality, and that maybe UFOs travel non-locally. They can, you know, like particles and waves, you know, the particle, if the particle, you know, if I'm on Earth and then some alien in some other part of the universe, I mean, that's two separate particles. But if you're in correspondence and your minds are in correspondence, then you can get direct messages from anywhere in the universe, as it were. And they can travel non-locally. If you have the right side tech, as I call it, the psychic technology, then then they should be able to travel from millions of miles away to here in a moment. And so synchronicity, you could say archetypally, just appears as a revelation. It just appears. And you think, well, what's the mechanism? How on earth does that work? Well, it works not only physically across time and space, but it actually works psychically from the very beginning of consciousness, all the way back to the aboriginals, all the way back to the earliest intelligence on this planet. And all of the knowledge that we've ever known in the Akashic Records, or in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, or the Alexandrian Library, all of the knowledge of humankind is a code. And that code can appear in different forms. So when you know, if you write a poem, there might be 10 different facets, like a crystal. And as you read the poem, you see different parts of the hologram, the different parts of the programming, the meta-programming. And whatever facet you see, you're in touch with this meta-program, and it reveals more and more and more to you. So I'm saying it doesn't matter whether you're researching into like the cave paintings in southern France, or you're thinking about the Apollo rocket putting a man on the moon, or you're watching 2001, or you're finding a book called The Black Rose, or you're going to have a dream tonight and somebody phones you tomorrow. That's all knowledge. I mean, we're connected on this planet physically through our consciousness, and as I say, Jung says in the archetype, in the collective unconscious, in the realm of the archetype, what he calls the psychoid is absolute knowledge. So the Akashic Records, you could say, is absolute knowledge. All the knowledge is there in a code, archetypal code, and then it projects as a symbolic code in the physical world and the psychic world. So the man planting the magnolia tree is part of that system. He's part of the synchronistic infrastructure of knowledge. So it's just a tree to everybody else in the ordinary world, in society, in the what I call the artificial consciousness. The programmed consciousness is just a magnolia. It's a beautiful magnolia tree, a red magnolia tree at the bottom of the hill. But to me, like Jung in his Magnolia dream, it's an image of the south. It's an image of the source of light, the center of the mandala. I mean, as the primitive people would say, everything can be animated by the spirit. Everything in nature can be animated by the spirit, which is exactly the same thing. So you go from spirit center to spirit center, because the storyteller, traveling along the lines of song, goes from village to village, or place to place, or cave to cave, and he's telling the story, and each person adds a bit to the story, and as he goes along, he changes the story, he adds bits and pieces, But he goes from spirit center to spirit center because somebody had a dream in that place, somebody had a revelation, somebody had an inspiration, etc., etc. And that, or the temples, or the churches, you have the relics of the saints, and all of that. And so the whole Gaia, the whole earth, has buried treasure. I mean, physically, but psychically buried treasure. Actually buried treasure. So, that's it, today. I seem to be doing this day by day. I mean, when I made the first part, it was just spontaneous. I just kind of did it. And I've done it each consecutive day. This is the 4th day. And I don't know how long I'm going to carry on doing this series, but, you know, I've got a lot to say. There's a lot of interesting connections, and it's fun remembering everything, putting all the pieces together. And it's creative. I mean, I feel very creative. I feel it's very intuitive. And, yeah. So, thanks for paying attention and listening. Bye.